So I've reviewed hundreds of affordable watches over the years, the vast majority of which are way below £1,000. But in this box, we've got something quite different to that. We have a Rolex. Now this one was sent in by one of our writers, Chris. He's loaned it to me to take a look at. And I've never handled a Rolex before. Of course, I've seen him in the shop windows and that. And I'm really grateful to have this opportunity. So yeah, this budget watch expert is going to have a look at Rolex and give me my first impressions. Let's take a look. Now the packaging is a bit different, and that's because this was just sent for cheap shipping, so it's in an IWC box instead. But I'm going to assume Chris was telling the truth and this is a real Rolex. And in here should be a 2019 214-270 Mark II Rolex Explorer. This is supposed to be a 39mm watch, although apparently it's closer to 40. But yeah, let's take a quick look at it and see what I think of this watch, which is somewhere in the region of £6,000 on the used market today. And there we go. Here we have a Rolex in the Ben's Watch Club studio. Let's pop that bracelet off. Now this watch has been worn quite a bit by Chris, so it's not in perfect condition, but it's probably in better condition than he had me believe. And there we go. Now it's probably thinner than I expected. I didn't expect it to be quite that thin. And specifically, the dial seems really close to the crystal, so the Rehort, however you pronounce it, isn't as deep as I expected there. It almost seems like the dial is flush with the crystal, which is nice. It's also got a raised sapphire crystal there. Case finishing is very good. Now that is 904L steel effectively. They're oyster steel, which is a material I have reviewed before. And I've just had a really close look off camera. I think the main subtle differences between this and watches that I normally look at are things like the hands and the markers. Now I can tell straight away that the hands and the markers are much cleaner than a lot of the budget watches that I look at. There's just less micro marks on them. Winding is very, very smooth and nice. The crown is silky smooth. The only other watch that's felt quite like that was one of the Christopher Ward watches, which was already about £1,000 already. The bracelet doesn't seem a great deal different from a lot of the watches I've encountered before, and it has got not severe signs of wear, but obvious signs of wear, especially in the underside of the links. Now the bracelet isn't quite as flush fit as I expected for a watch that costs thousands of pounds. There is a ever so slight lip there, but it's integrated pretty well. The dial's definitely the standout, the dial and the bezel too, I would say. Let's have a go at that clasp. That's a pretty snazzy looking clasp with some little engraving there. That sits very nicely. Perfect tolerances on the opening there. But for the most part, the watch is pretty much as I expected. I knew that there'd be some subtle signs that this watch was slightly better than some other ones, which I probably would have guessed would be something to do with the dial or the handset or something. And the movement too, I've just moved it around a bit. The rotor in there is super quiet. That's also another sign. The cheaper watches that I tend to cover tend to have some very noisy rotors. So in comparison, this one's very quiet. And while this is 904L steel, I have to say, I do think I have seen finishing that's as good as this on some other watches. For example, the Wise watches, I think out of the box at least, maybe under the microscope there'll be a slight difference, but out of the box they seem just as well finished as this, at least in terms of the case finishing. Even the likes of San Martin are not a million miles away from this. Same with the Christopher Ward I recently reviewed. Sadly, I won't be able to take a look at the movement in this one because I actually don't have a proper tool for the back of this, and for a one-off video there's no real point in me investing in that. But what I have got is a bunch of Rolex Explorer homages, a big variety of AliExpress versions of this watch or imitations of this watch, and we're going to compare them all and see who gets the closest, just to see, out of curiosity, if any of them can manage to get close for a fraction of the price, or is a bit of a competition between all them brands to see which one's the best. Not that I would ever buy a homage watch myself or recommend it necessarily. So there's a look at it on my 6¼ inch wrist. And while it's not the biggest Rolex by far, it's still probably too big for my tiny arm. My tiny arms need like 36mm versions of these watches really. But it doesn't look bad. The back is quite flush, I'm assuming just because the watch is pretty thin. But would I ever drop 6,000 on a watch like this? Not in my current financial situation, no. I don't think I could drop that on any watch, even if I really loved the look. And that's the part that's actually a little bit tricky for me to judge, because I've seen this design a million times online. You see these Rolexes all over the place, at least in YouTube videos and that. And because I'm so familiar with it, I struggle to decide whether I love it or not. Now, out of curiosity, I'll do a crystal check. I'll also take a look at the luminescence as well, because I don't know a lot about the lume performance of Rolex, and I'll be keen to see how it compares to the cheapies that I reviewed before. So we've got Casio Oceanus here. We know that is sapphire, and just keen to see if this scores particularly high. It actually scores slightly lower. So that goes all the way up to amber. And the Rolex only has 3, maybe 4 bars, which is quite unusual actually. It should still be sapphire because mineral crystal and the other crystals don't give any reading at all on this diamond selector. But that's interesting nonetheless. I thought it would at least match that. So I'm keen to know in the comments if any of you know why that might have drawn a slightly lower result. Now, I've reviewed some pretty strong lume over the years. I'm keen to see if this is among the winners. Yeah, the lume's really good. Lume is really, really good. I can tell it straight away. Extremely clear, in fact, as you would expect when you spend this much on a watch. Now, if there's one thing I wasn't quite expecting, although Chris did mention it in his email, is the actual surface of the dial. Now, I had the impression that these Rolex Explorers had like a super glossy dial surface, but this one has like a slightly mattified dial. Well, they recently relaunched it in 36 and 40mm. Apparently they've got even glossier dials, which I think I'd probably prefer over these like slightly mattified ones. I'll be keen to get this under the macro lens, see how it compares to some of these homage Chinese brands. Cheers to Chris for sending this over.